I was like, because Instagram
Cool.
told me to, now
Okay.
buy it.
Undo the video.
Make sure I'm resident computer.
Audio mute.
Can you tell?
All the way to the left. At the top. Now it has to warm up. It's okay.
And you get to stall with talking.
Yeah.
Cool.
Talk about your
Stall.
experience.
Okay,
And what
so
you're gonna do. Give us a summary.
all right, so we're gonna talk about the differences between additive and subtractive color. Okay, here we go. That started a lot faster. All right. So, does anybody know what additive and subtractive color are? Awesome. Okay. So, additive color is color made with light. We start out with white, and every color added to that builds up to make. We start out with black, build up every color into that to make white. That's used in computers because we see light, and this is how light is processed as color. Subtractive color is when like ink and print and stuff, like with paint. You start out with white, and the more colors you add, you get black.
What does RGB and CMYK stand for?
Right. RGB stands for red, green, blue, and CMYK stands. Oh my God. CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and key.
Black.
Black.
Key black.
Yeah.
Black.
Yeah.
Ethan told me key. Because he was like, it's called the key black. I was like, okay, Ethan, thank you. Sorry, I'm getting.
So this is the color wheel, right? So it shows, right? So it shows all of the all of the hues in this kind of order. You have your cool colors on this side, and your warm colors on this side. This is kind of how everything in the color space is seen visually when we work in Lumetri. So it's important to know.
Yeah. So every color has a hue, luminance, and a saturation to it. Hue is like the color of it: red, blue, green, orange. The saturation is like the intensity of the color we see. Like as you add white to it, the color will become less intense. As you add black to it, the color becomes more intense. Am I right? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Luminance is the vibrancy of the color. So as you can see you can kind of see over here. The color becomes less bright as we add more gray to it. Colors have different relationships to each other. Like two colors across each other from the wheel are complementary colors to each other. An example of that. Let me see if I can pull up this picture real quick. Oh, that went away. Sorry about that. I'm just going to keep going.
So we can just go through these relationships here. So monochromatic color scheme obviously is just kind of one of these slivers on the hue wheel. And so that'll have colors with the similar hue but different saturation and luminance levels. But if you look at complementary colors, obviously they're going to be on the other side of the wheel. And they're opposites, so they give good color contrast, but they also work well together. That's what's most commonly used probably in Hollywood movies is the teal and orange complementary scheme. So you'll have skin tones here in your orange, and then teal make up most of the other things in the image. And then there are these other relationships here too that are used sometimes, mostly in photography though. It's harder to achieve these in a moving image, but complementary color schemes are very important to know.
Awesome. Okay. So
what are these subjective meanings for colors? Like passive, active, and then all this like mysterious? How can a color be mysterious?
So colors can make us feel different emotions. For example, like a scene with lots of red can make us feel intense, like fire, anger. A scene with lots of blues and stuff in it brings more of like a dreary, sad feeling. While lots of yellows and brighter colors are more associated with happiness and joy.
It seems pretty subjective though, right?
Yeah, context is very important with that, obviously.
There's a lot of theory that goes into color psychology. It's different for every culture. So in the US, green is also commonly associated with money, but in other parts of the world where their money is different color, obviously that means something different to them. Red is also luck in China. They have a lot of associations with red and fortune in Asian cultures. So it's different everywhere, and it's very subjective, like you said. But for US, which I'm assuming this is what most of this is, that's what the most common Western associations with color psychology are.
Should I move on to the?
Do you want to talk about pre-production?
I can talk about. I think is enough of production.
And costumes, maybe. Whoever wants to.
Okay, so actually, can you talk about that because I?
Yeah, I mean, so color is important in every stage of production. In pre-production, mostly with the costuming and your mise en scène, trying to work out a color scheme because it's going to be really hard to change later on in post. So you want to know what kind of color scheme you're trying to achieve going into it, so you can get your props and things to coincide with that. And then as far as production, making sure you shoot your image correctly is extremely important because there's only so much you can do in post. If you have everything overexposed, you lose that data and you can't get it back, even if you're a really good colorist. So exposing things correctly and also trying to shoot on a log profile versus linear, which we'll talk about later, and having low contrast, low saturation makes it super easy in post to achieve whatever look you want. And then obviously post-production color is where you really get in to either Lumetri or Resolve and create the look that you want to have. So
So if you wanted to create a monochromatic look for a scene, it could be one color, different values of it and saturation. How would you start that?
So that would start in pre-production with the costuming. If you want a green monochromatic scheme, everything they're wearing has to be some shade of green. Everything in the on the set has to be some shade of green, and then you can really tweak that and emphasize it in post.
Awesome. Okay, so you can use. All right.
You want me to touch on shooting, log, and video, and that sort of thing?
Sure.
So there's a lot of tech that goes into capturing color and capturing light in footage, in camera. If any of you are DPs, I'm sure you know something called color space, which is the way you capture color and light from the camera. So cameras, not every camera, but very high-end cameras, you could pretty much, if you know what shooting RAW is essentially you point your camera and you record, and that is what you get. You're getting the actual, whatever you're seeing is in front of you, you're getting all of that data. Now, if you've ever dealt with RAW footage before, it's immense. You could fill up hard drives within 10 minutes. It's really unwieldy for most projects that are considered the average video sort of, like the average person in prosumer and even in professional worlds would never need that much data because it's just unnecessary. No screen on a consumer is going to play back at that resolution or that much detail, so there's no need to capture in that much detail. However, there is one reason you might want to capture in that much detail. It's for color. The more information you're getting out of your camera, the more you are able to tweak and trim and bring up and mess with your color in post-production color manipulation software such as Lumetri. So, yes, this is log. So there's many different color spaces you could shoot in RAW. I'm blanking on any other ones, but they break down into two different types essentially. There's linear and logarithmic, or log for short. So shooting in a linear color space is when you want to. It's a much more compressed version of color space, or sorry, it's a much. This is where the math is going to trip me up. Shooting linearly will get you a more accurate version of what it looks like actually in camera. So it's an uncompressed version of what you shoot in camera with. So Shannon's gonna do it right now. So if you were to shoot linearly, this is probably what it would look like. And this is probably what it looks pretty close like on set. You get all your color depth, and it looks nice in camera, and you can bring it in, and it will look, kind of nice in post-production in your editing software. However, there's way less room to mess with color in a linear color space because of the way it's captured, as opposed to log space, which if we take off the LUT. So if you shoot in log, your footage is going to be way more washed out. It's going to look much more desaturated, and it's going to be much more, it's going to have a lot less detail in camera. However, it allows you, the way it's captured is it's compressing all of it down so that it's not taking up so much space on the front end, but it allows you to expand it out on the back end in post-production software. So generally it's considered better to shoot in log, and then when you're on set, you'll often have director's camera, producer's camera, that sort of thing, that will apply a lot to what they're looking at, but not to what you're actually recording. That way you have the best of both worlds. You can see what it might look like once we bring it in, and then do all the work to it. So I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, cool. Actually, do you want to do scopes now?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to go to vector scope?
Yeah, sure. The way you.
So scopes are what we use to look at the image without actually looking at the actual image, so we can try to read what's going on. So this is called a vector scope. And so that hue wheel we were looking at earlier, it's basically the same idea. So you have all of the hues here, cyan, blue, magenta, all in the circle. And the further out these points get from the center, the more saturated they are. So you can see right now it's kind of just a blob in the middle. That's because it was shot in log and it hasn't been graded at all yet. So it kind of encapsulates all of the hues. You have some green, you have some yellow. And you can see as you move the saturation up and down, this is shrinking and growing because it's getting more saturated, so it's going to be a bigger map there. Why vector scopes are important is one, when you're trying to create that color scheme that we were talking about earlier, like maybe a complementary color scheme, you want to try to move these points into a straight line or into the shape that you're trying to make. So right now it's kind of a blob, and it's hard to look at for your audience. So you want to direct it into a straight line, maybe on orange and teal, or whatever kind of color scheme you're trying to create. And the other reason why vector scopes are really important is for skin tones. So getting correct skin tones is extremely important when you're color grading, because if the skin tones aren't correct, then it's going to look like really alien, and it's going to take your audience out of it a little bit. So we have the skin tone line on this vector scope right here, and it's on the orange hue, and you want to try to select your skin tones and put them right on that line so it looks as natural as possible.
The reason, by the way, we're going to go through a lot of these different types of scopes and graphs. The reason why we use scopes and graphs is because no two monitor is the same in terms of color. Every single monitor in this room, every single phone, even if they're made in the same factory, same manufacturer, they're all different because of imperfections in the quality of the glass or the pixels or anything of that nature. Also, most people don't bother to color correct their monitors frequently or with much care. So everyone's going to look at this footage differently. It looks different up on this computer than it does through this projector. So if things seem to, I think this, if I remember, like it crushes it pretty badly, the projector. So the reason why we use these scopes is because these are an actual information, these are quantifiable, right? This is beyond just looking at it and saying, oh yeah, this looks good. These will tell you if you are like within parameters that will produce a good quality image on any monitor. And like anything that ever shows up on a monitor has been color corrected in some way. There's nothing that goes from like the edit suite to a sound mixer and then just out the door without looking at the picture quality. Every movie, every commercial, like all this is done for any sort of project, however big or small. If it ends up on air or in a movie, the reason why it has to be color corrected, by the way, is television movies have restrictions on color and brightness. So if you go to a yeah, so yeah, it's also on here. So the hexagon around the inner one is pretty much your safe space. If you ever have a color intensity that goes beyond that, that is not safe for television. And you would be fined by the FCC for violating that. So you definitely want to, everything goes through this process in order to make sure that it is safe and within regulations and within guidelines. And you'll see similar barriers on every single scope we go through. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that would.
This shows the best on the waveform.
Why is it need to stay with
there is some history towards it for those guidelines. It's mostly, I believe it's a health concern for those who are epileptic and those other audiovisual stimulus overload sort of conditions that you're not going to blast white bright light into people's homes. It's also for the safety of the equipment and televisions. You don't want to burn out pixels, that sort of thing. I believe that's somewhere in the ballpark of why those restrictions are in place.
Yeah, I think it's some of both.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like originally it was broadcast technology.
Yeah, originally
and
there was
display technology that couldn't display those colors.
Yeah, originally, like if you tried to display a value over something, like the pixel wouldn't, like there would be no image that would, because there's nothing that would correspond with it. Now it's more of a safety guideline.
Cool. Okay. Clipping.
So
Okay.
within that same vein, do you want to talk about it or should I go?
If you want to keep going with this.
So within that same vein, Kyle, if you want to like just jack up the
Yeah.
exposure. So you can see, perfect. That's exactly what you want to look like. No, but you can see that in this image, it stops you at 100. Now there is a way to disable this. If you go into settings, I think you could force it to like be more than 100, but you never want it to be. This is the safe zone for your color. This is clipping, essentially. So if you can find a way so that it doesn't clip, like there is a way. It might be this reddish down here. It's the clamp. Yeah, it's the clamp. Or maybe not. No. I think it's supposed to be the clamp. Normally clamp signal means that
Maybe if I readjust it.
yeah, that it's blocking out your, it's preventing you from going over the safety limit here or below the safety limit down here at 0.
Can I make it go to 0? No.
If you put it, if you take it out of log and give it an input, like, which one did you put on?
Come on, Alexa.
No, if you bring it all the way down. No, still.
No.
We'll find some other footage. So clamping is when it stops you. It safety proofs your video so that even if somehow it got past your editors and that sort of something, when you went to go export it, you'd still be within safety guidelines, which is good because you won't be fined. So that's what clamping is, and that's what clipping is, right? There's information here that if our camera was better, we could actually maybe get some information out of it instead of it being all white, but maybe not so much with the exposure jack like all the way up. No?
Oh.
Just not this much. And it's the same down here, except when it's called 0, it's called crushing instead of clipping. It's the same with true white. True white and true black are as bad on television as each other. They're equivalent. You don't want absolute blackness on the screen because that is not correct when it comes to, because then it'd be producing no light, but the pixel doesn't know how to fire if there's no light. And all white is bad because then you blow out the pixels. So that's what those safety limits are for, and that's what clipping and crushing are. But if we were set to normal, this is what it should normally be, something in the vein. You can see also, clipping is not just a safety guideline, it's also within camera. So in this case, this footage has been, someone set an exposure cap for the footage, and it's this whiteboard pretty much. It's super bright in the image, and there's no detail there. So even if we tried to get detail out of it, like if there was maybe some sort of small writing on it that we wanted to see, it's just not there. Like there's just literally no way. The board is going to look the same color regardless. There's no information there for our Lumetri to get back because it was too bright when we shot it.
And that's the waveform.
Yeah,
Also,
this waveform is for exposure, by the way.
we also kind of totally skipped over how to get to this part of Premiere. Does everyone know how to get to the color workspace in Premiere? If you don't, raise your hand. Cool. Okay, so we don't need to go back and do that.
Want to go to RGB?
Yeah. Do you want a different clip? Or do you want this one too?
This will work.
Cool.
Actually, go to the green screen one. Yeah. So RGB Parade is basically the same thing as waveform, except it splits it into the red, green, and blue channels. And what this is really helpful for is color balancing. And that's more on the correction side of things and really getting the image balanced and natural. So you can see here, because we have this green screen, the green channel in the midtones area here is really active. There's all this, all these pixels there, while the blue and red are basically empty there. And if you want to try to get correct whites, you can basically mask out around your whites and try to get those red, green, and blue values to be even, and that'll make the whole image balanced.
Do you want to go over how to read these? Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Just go to the Luma one, because that one's easier to demonstrate. So by the way, when you're reading these waveforms read left to right, so if you scrub through the footage, I don't know if there's a lot of movement in here.
This is her head.
Right. Is there one with more movement?
That's her hair.
Ooh.
No. Oh, actually, you can see the woman
Yeah,
walking.
there. So this is for brightness. These read left to right just as the way, so the leftmost part of the screen corresponds with the leftmost part of the graph, and then all the way over. So with this one, you can see she's being backlit, so it's not as, the background is brighter than her. So you can see her move across the screen on our waveform for exposure because she's not as bright.
So we see a
There's a slight
inverse of her, like a reflection.
Yeah, I was just wondering the same thing.
Can you play forward and back? Maybe you're gonna quiz me on that. I don't know. You want to try this one?
Well, what are we reading?
We're reading, this is a luminosity, right?
Yeah.
This is brightness. Yeah.
So what are her clothes?
Dark.
Mm-hmm.
So anything darker would show up at the bottom, and anything brighter would show up at the top.
Yep, that makes sense. Oh, I see. Okay, yep. Okay, very good. Everyone catch that?
So
I don't
she
think
has
so.
bright pants on, so that's showing up higher on
Yeah.
the scope, and then she has a dark shirt on and dark hair, so it's showing up lower.
It's difficult to catch your fingers, but this is her hair essentially down here, and her shirt, and her jeans are not like everything's not as bright, which is why it disappears up here. But the rest of her has varying difference of brightness, so they appear on different parts within the medium of the waveform.
And it's, yeah, I mean, because this image is so clear, you know, from the waveform to the image itself, it's a little deceiving. Because what's being displayed, right, is just a pixel value essentially,
Yeah.
left to right.
Yes.
That's cool. You can see it like that.
There's not one.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's all right.
Worst clips, Kyle.
From John Scott.
Not all of them.
One of them is John Scott's.
Alright, you wanna? What else did we want covered? Was there
Okay.
a scope?
I think those are the 3 scopes we wanted to go over. I think. Is there?
You wanna go over the parts of them? Highlights, shadows, whites, blacks.
Yeah, sure. Excellent.
Why should we leave this top basic correction?
Okay. So. Oh, sorry. My mind is blanking right now. Can you please say?
Yeah, sure. So the parts of the waveform, there's essentially 3 parts. You have your highlights, which are up here in like your 70s to 100s, your midtones, which are like your 70s to 40s, and then the low end, which has a name that I'm blanking on, is like your 0 to 30s. Your shadows, that's what they are. And they all have corresponding ways to change them. Man, my hair is a mess. Why is no one telling me this? Over here. So exposure changes your whole image. It takes your whole waveform and then just like pushes it up from the bottom. So that's generally, you don't want to mess with exposure too much because it's a good way to add grain to your footage. So that's something you want to use delicately.
This one's good.
Contrast is just going to take your waveform and spread it out. So it makes your high ends higher and your low ends lower, and just stretches your middle. That's more of a color thing than a brightness thing, but it can also be used for brightness. Your highlights take your top ends and drag them up from the top. So the top part of your waveform is extended, but your bottom remains intact for the majority of it. Your shadows are the opposite, takes your low ends and drags them down. Or it alters the low ends of your footage. If you jack up your shadows, you would bring those up. Your whites are your mid-tone to high end. It kind of drags up from the upper middle. And then your blacks are, it drags down from your lower middle. So those are all the different forms of, and then saturation is not a brightness thing, so this graph doesn't do a whole lot, but it is a color thing. So yeah, on our YUVs, you see it expand, and that adds in more hue. Saturation is a hue-based control. So that's it for like basic Lumetri.
So if you're
And there's
white
also
balance,
temperature and tint.
what happens if you shot and you didn't white balance?
So just like add a whole bunch of blue tiles. So if you don't white balance, your footage will probably look something like this, and then when you open up your scope, you'll probably see something like this.
Wow.
White balance will generally just make it orange. That's bad. So if you don't white balance and your footage looks something egregious like this, and you open up your YUV or your parade, and you have a massive. If you're not on your center point for your wide UV, or if your parade looks something like that, when you want it to look like a normal white, what you can do, if we're lucky in this case, because there's this bounce in the shot, which is nice and white. If you have something white in your image, you can use the white balance selector and pick a white image in your shot, and it will try to correct for any color and make that object you chose a white object in your image. So you see it here as well. It's a pretty good job. It doesn't account for whether you're indoors or outdoors. So if you do this white balance on an outdoor shot, it will look like it is a white neutral light, which is not true of outdoor light. Outdoor light is blue, so it might look a little off, and you might want to add some blue back into it. Same if you have special lighting in if you're shooting in a fluorescent environment, fluorescent lights are green, which is also why they look so ugly. So you probably want to add some green tint back into your shot if you want that to look that way. Because white balance will give you pure white. And there's really no such thing as pure white light, so you're going to want to just go back in and tinker with it a bit. Speaking of temperature and tint, temperature, I touched briefly just on it. Temperature is the color of your light. Light tends to range from blue to orange. Blue is outdoor light. Orange is generally the lights created by anything you bring on set, unless you have HMIs. So that's what those are. And we typically associate indoor light with orange light. That stems back from when we had candles for lighting and torches, so that's why most indoor lights are orange. And outdoor lights are blue. Tint is more of a correction thing. Tint is isn't something that, like some sort of fluorescent lights will create green light, but it's something that you generally want to keep just more neutral, as opposed to temperature, which is more of a aspect sort of environment thing. Just depending on your white balance, you might end up more pink or more green, and it's something you want to try to cancel out as best as possible. LUTs are short for lookup tables, and they're essentially it's a way that the computer can shortcut to specific color information. So they're great for looks if you go to Creative File. So these input LUTs are for basic. So when you shoot log, and then you want it to look like a decent image, you use a lookup table, and that takes it out of the log, the flat image you have, and it expands out your log information into a nice image.
Yeah, so that's your first step if you shoot log. Every time you bring it in, there are specific technical LUTs for pretty much every camera. So you try to find a log to Rec 709 is the linear space. Try to find a log to Rec 709 LUT for your camera specifically, and it'll transfer it into that space so you can work with it kind of like a normal image. But you still won't lose that information, which is why you want to shoot a log in the first place.
So what cameras here would they want to use a LUT with that we have at PPEX?
The Ursa shoots in log, so you definitely want to use a LUT with that.
The FS100 shoots log. Am I right about that? Yes.
In 3 does.
Yeah. No. A lot of the cameras here could fake it though. You could shoot really flat. Yeah. Even if cameras don't have log functions per se, you could fake it by shooting super washed out and just with a higher color space. So it's not as big.
What's the benefit of shooting log instead of picking a color profile in your camera and recording?
So this conversation usually happens. You're on set with your DP and they're like, well, just shoot in camera. It'll be fine. And then you get back into your editing suite and your director sits down with you and they're like, no, I don't like that. Can we change that? And then you have to tell your director, well, we shot in camera, so if you want to spend a lot of time and get a colorist to first undo all the work you did in camera and then reapply a new one, sure. But that's a lot of effort and a lot of wasted time when all you have to do is just shoot log originally, and then you don't have to go back and pave over the work that you no longer want. So that is why you would avoid just shooting in camera with a certain color profile, because things change, and then you want to change them in post, and then you have to work over all the other mistakes that you did in camera. So that's why you would avoid doing that.
When you shoot in log, are you kind of like undoing a lot of the on-set lighting you're doing? Like if you're creating a vibe on set, are you kind of like desaturating what you're doing?
So once you transfer it back into the linear color space, all that information will come back. The reason why you shoot log is because, so in this image, for instance, if we shot linear, this would be totally blown out, and we would never be able to get any of that information back. Even the sky, probably, yeah. So when we go log, even if we then transfer it back to a linear color space, that information is still there, and we can still get it back later.
Okay, then you do that by doing live.
Yeah, so you're going to put a LUT on it first, and then you can go in after the LUT's on and still bring those levels down if it turns out exposed after the LUT.
Yeah, log actually captures more information than a linear color space would. It just compresses it so that it's not a massive file that the camera or memory can't unravel, which is why it looks so awful without a lot.
So basically, if you shoot linear on set, you're locking yourself into that color space, and you can't really get out of it. Whereas if you shoot in log, you're preserving all the gel and lighting and everything that you did, plus you have all this freedom to make it however contrasty you want. Like you can have the blacks as black as you want and the highlights as bright as you want. You're not locked into them.
Does that affect what you be exposing from
Yeah, so if you're not using a separate monitor with your lookup table applied to it, you really want, and all cameras have this option, you really want your histogram open on your camera, because that will tell you the actual value of the lighting levels in your camera, as opposed to you just looking at it and seeing it through some other color space or some other lookup table. I don't think there's much beyond. There might be, some cameras might have other color tools and brightness tools built into them. I think also most have color histograms that you can look at in addition to just luminosity waveform. But you definitely want to look at those before you shoot. And there's also, like, all the film students are familiar with, now I'm going to forget the name of them.
Light meter?
Yes, light meters. I'm like blanking on basic equipment now. Film students are very familiar with light meters because film obviously has no built-in electronics to it, so they have to measure it manually, and that's why they do that. And there's also color meters for film, similar applications.
Also, something really important, when you're shooting, you want to try to shoot with the highest exposure you can without getting any clipping, because you can always bring those levels down. You can always bring the shadows down. But if you shoot at a lower exposure and you try to bring that up, you're going to get a ton of noise. So you don't want clipping, obviously, but as high as you can get without getting that clipping is where you want to be at.
So what's good practice on set? Like a grayscale.
Using a gray card to expose the camera beforehand, or you can even get a color chart. They're a little bit more expensive, but just exposing your camera to a gray card or color chart beforehand is going to make exposure a lot easier, because you can't really see with your eyes.
Yeah, this one shows green really well.
Right.
Anyway.
Do you want to go over each of the things?
You want to take this now?
Sure. Okay, so I don't know how to go over curves, so I can't go over curves.
I'll go over curves.
Okay.
So curves are pretty much an extension of these basic correction tools we were talking about. So in this case, we're on our whites. So this is going to this would affect every aspect of our image. So if you just grab the bottom there, Kyle, and pull it to the right, you can see that we are pulling down the whites as we move from left to right. So now it's all black. If you undo that and actually grab the bottom corner square and pull it up, yeah, there we go. So that's bringing up the whites until it's all white. And you can do this for each individual color of your RGB. You could do, so that's bringing up down the reds, making it all red. You can also, so if you just like leave it halfway and then add another one, or no, within red, add another point.
Oh.
And then, yeah, so you could do some really weird things where you inverse your red. So, yep, that's the thing you could do.
So mostly what curves are good for is setting like a black and white point for your
Yeah.
image, and then also adding contrast. So if you want to show a contrast curve, that's basically what you just did. You have 2 points and you make kind of an S curve. That's going to give you better contrast.
So that was
Sometimes
Extreme contrast.
Oh, wait, that was the
So
inverse.
this is pretty much what a negative is, by the way. When you flip it like that, it's just taking.
No.
Other way.
Cool.
So just bring the midtones up and then bring the shadows
Drag
down.
the right one up.
Yeah.
No, not that much.
Oh.
No, it's closer. Almost. No,
There you go.
It's like, yeah, like a logarithm.
that's close.
Yeah, so like you said, generally, sometimes, so this is for every part of the curve though. So if we move on from curve.
And if you want to add contrast, definitely use the curves over like the contrast slider in the basic corrections because it gives you way more control. You really shouldn't use the basic correction sliders much if you don't have to.
Showing on from curves. Do you want to do wheels? Do you know what wheels are? Got it.
I know what wheels are.
All right.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to talk again. These are to affect like the individual colors of each of the highlights, midtones, and shadows. So if we take the midtone wheel and like drag it towards red, all the midtones, actually the higher you go, the more it's going to affect, but makes all the midtones red. Same thing with the shadows. And these are really hard to move. So really like you only need to move them a little bit to get a lot out of them. Something like that. Actually, a good one to do this with is this girl doesn't have a normal skin tone. So we
How can you
can...
tell she doesn't have a normal skin tone? How can you tell she doesn't?
Oh, right. So we can look at the vector scope and you can see that... So this is the background. This is the green screen. And we can tell that because if we go into effect controls and we can make a little... Grab the pen, and we can make a little mask around her face. And we can see that that line is gone, so that was the green screen, but we can see that this is her face and it is not on the line. So we
So
can,
her face, really, the saturation is coming up in this area and like the reds and magentas, which is not what you want.
yeah. So we're gonna add orange, try and move her over there, and see if we can make her look less gray-ish. So now if we get rid of this mask, we can see that she is no longer dead looking. And then these are for the brightness of each of them.
Yeah.
So each of these will change how bright the highlights, midtones, and shadows are. Lumetri has a new feature called face detection, and you can't, like, if you get another shot, her face is way too red now. If you get another shot where someone's face is the right color that you want, you can use this, but it doesn't work the best, and I don't have an example to show that with. Oh my god. And now I think I just put myself in.
Also, something to keep in mind, the skin tone line on the vector scopes is like a guide, but it's not always totally correct. Sometimes if you move it right on the skin tone line, it'll look super weird still. So use your eye for it also, but it's more of just a guide to get you in the right region.
I don't remember how to
Or I
turn
think
it.
it's the thing at the bottom. Not that one, but
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
there you go.
Do you guys want to do HSL?
Sure, I can do that. So if you want to select your skin tones in a better way than just putting that mask around it, because it's a moving image, so if she's moving, the mask isn't going to work with that movement. So a way to do that is you can select certain pixels based on their hue, saturation, and luminance. So if you want to just try to select her skin tones, you're going to take the eyedropper and just kind of move it over the skin tone region.
I'm going to undo what I did from the
Okay.
other thing.
And you hit that checkbox right here, the color gray. I think that's how you get the Lumetri well. Yeah, so what he just selected are the pixels you see here. If you want to get the eyedropper with the plus next to it, and just like move it over the skin tones a little bit to get more of them in there. So now we're selecting really all the skin tones. Yeah, that's pretty good. And you can blur and denoise them a little bit to get a better mask down here.
Oh.
Blur and denoise it a little bit. Yeah, just a little bit. So now we have the skin tone selected, and that's going to move with the image. So if you were to play the clip right now, I don't know if it'll play. But you see we have the skin tone selected with movement. So now we can alter the skin tones much more accurately. And we can affect just the skin tones instead of the whole image too. And there are other reasons you might want to use this. You can possibly like change the color of a certain object a little bit. If you have a red sign and you want it to be yellow, you can select that red and move it more towards yellow. Yeah, that's just blue.
Great choice.
Cool. That's all the tools and.
There's one more.
Oh, right.
So vignettes, for those of you who don't know, are essentially edge feathering for your whole picture. So if you actually make it negative, this is very, very rarely will you ever see a white vignette, but vignettes are typically black. Just add a little more dimension to your shots. Apparently we're making an iris now. And this is a common tool that filmmakers use for darker scenes.
A lot of times it's used in like a one shot to help focus your eye more towards the subject.
Yeah, it's a really subtle tool that can be used for just that. So if you toggle the vignette on and off, it's something that really you would hardly notice. Well, this one's pretty pronounced, but if you do it more subtly, it's a good way to draw attention to parts of the frame in a very elegant manner.
Some lenses and cameras have heavier vignette.
Yes, it's something you could do in camera, and that's what, because it's from the old, when cameras used to have irises that you could iris them in and out. The not irises and the ones we know, but like the iris type of close open, which is where you get that iris transition from, the circle closing in on someone in the distance. It's old style film. And that's where vignettes come from. And that is something we can do digitally. If there's anything else. Is there anything else that you guys are curious about that we didn't cover? Or anything we should?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the second, go to the second clip. Let's say I wanted to make that like the Hollywood like teal and orange. Can y'all try that? I want to see how you would go about doing that. I don't know.
I would go with the color wheels.
Oh.
Yeah, I can just
Yeah, you
do
want
something.
yeah.
It's like a easy way to do this. It's also really easy to go overkill. But if you want to just drag your midtones, which are where your skin tones usually lie, more towards orange, and it's going to look super orange, but then you drag the shadows towards teal, and it kind of balances it out. But you get a subtle teal and orange look, so our skin tone is much more orange, and the shadows are teal, and it gives you a lot more contrast. But it's super easy to go overkill with this. So you have to really be subtle with what you're doing.
I think the problem with that ask is those are usually nighttime in
Right.
indoor
Hmm.
scenes, so
That
usually
looks-
the shadows would go more blue
Yeah.
teal.
Yeah, is there a...
Oh wait, there's that. Oh, well, that's not night.
And if I do it on this image, you're probably going to get color cast in the shadows. Yeah, so that's kind of what you're going for. You just want to be really careful that you don't get a lot of color cast in your shadow, because that
Okay.
looks very bad.
Bad.
And the blue and orange is typically a grade. Did we talk about this?
No, we didn't.
Okay. So
What's the difference between color
Yeah, yeah.
correction and color grading?
So you can see up here it says basic correction. So when you get your footage back and you've taken your lookup table and you've applied the lookup table to your log footage, there's probably still some things that are off because your white balance paper wasn't fully within your lighting, or maybe you weren't zoomed in all the way on your white balance paper, or for any other variety of reasons. Your shot takes place over a long period of time, the cloud passes around the sun. Numerous reasons why color can change within your shot and ends up looking not so great, even with your lookup table back here. You do correction. You do correction first, you make it look normal, and you make it look like every other shot that is in that scene. So that way you have a cohesive blank slate for your scene. And then, when you're done with that, and you want to bring out your blues and oranges to make it look like some classic Hollywood, or if you want to make it noir and you want to desaturate it a whole lot, that is called a color grade. And a grade is essentially the creative aspects that go into color. Your correction is the basic work that goes into making it look acceptable, and then the grade is the creative aspect of it.
And so in a professional workflow, the footage is going to go from production to dailies. And the dailies are really where the correction happens. And then they'll move from there to the colorist who's going to actually put the grade on it. So you can kind of mimic that with your own workflow too.
Anything else?
Is it common to work like in a series of masks, like masks something, other masks, other things, but instead of like just working like continuously?
You kind of want to be careful with how much you use masks because they can become noticeable and it can make the image look unnatural if you have masks that are super different within the same image. I would really stick to using it just for specific applications like skin tones or trying to change the color of a specific object or something like that.
Has anyone ever tried Resolve?
Resolve has a
I've tried.
grade tracking tool.
Yeah, so if you really want to get serious about correction and grading, you kind of have to work within Resolve or a program like that. Lumetri is a pretty basic software.
Resolve's masks are much more sophisticated than this can do. And they also have very good tracking for their masks. And you can mess with feathering much more in depth and size and
You could do the inner feathering versus the outer.
It
feathering.
comes in different curves.
Yeah.
so-
Just feathering around.
Right.
Yeah.
Basically, color correction and color grading is essential for every project that you do. And we're slowly getting more and more people interested in it and trained on it. So if you want to get more one-on-one training, we have a bunch of people in this room who want to practice and want to try and help. So if you want to talk to them after, there's at least 5 people in this room.
I think that's all we have time for.
Yeah.
So that's
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.